No. The last curse was Eden. So.
Oh, right. Yeah, you're right. She did.
Yeah.
Ooh. Why did that keep
what
happening?
A sight. I don't know. Because uncomfortable. Probably uncomfortable.
Leave the babies alone. Hi, I'm Gabe.
And I'm Kat.
And we're the Ghouls next door.
You went a higher
Talking about
octave
spooky
there.
stuff. Door.
Talking spooky stuff, you know. We're doing it.
Mi, door. Yes, we are talking spooky stuff. We are continuing our For the Culture series where we are talking about foreign films or films that are highlighting specific cultures and things that are happening in them and in their environments. And today we are talking about Impetigore.
We sure are. And we have things to say about it, I imagine.
Yes, yeah. It's Impetigore is a favorite in the horror community. It is recent. It was 2019 with like a wider release in 2020. And so it was like people getting involved in it. It is on Shudder, which seems to be where the hub is for these films that we appreciate.
It's Horror Hub. Not Pornhub,
just gonna keep telling people, Horror Hub, and that's called OnlyFans. Shudder is our OnlyFans. No, Shudder's great, and so is this film. It is, we're definitely gonna get into it. There's a lot of deep sadness surrounding the culture part of it, that really feeds well into the film itself, and I just think it was genuinely a good time.
Yeah, no, I have no critiques of this film. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think that's something that we've seen in this series is that like there's lots of positive gems to it, even if the like stories that we're talking about are unbelievably like sad and based on things that are just like really upsetting and unfortunate.
Yeah. And it's like at the beginning of this series, I mentioned that we were going to do a Blumhouse film because he has those 4 that came out that were done by people of color. And we had the idea to do Evil Eye, but we just feel like it didn't fit into here as well. Like it didn't have as strong a connection to like this overarching theme of what was happening in that culture, and so we replaced it with Impetigore. Sorry that if you were looking forward to a Blumhouse, we are not going to cover one for the series. We're not doing it.
Maybe
but
another
I think
time.
you'll enjoy this.
We have a long life. Filled with possible horror movies to cover, so or like, hopefully,
new one every week, so we're bound to run into it, I'm sure. But for this one, we are not. We're going to be doing Impetigore from Indonesia, and that's what we're focused on. So, Kat, take it away in the horror corner.
Yeah, we're going to tell you some facts about stuff. As a warning, they're pretty sad. This film was based off of some really sad stuff that's real, and I guess like if you aren't prepared to hear about sad stuff, I feel like you just feel sad from watching the movie though. Like in a good way. But there's a theme of violence against women in the film Impetigore, perpetuated by men in the film, and is actually a pressing issue in Indonesia, which is something that we're going to get into. But what we see on screen very early on is like an introduction to this. So you have like her alone in a toll booth with the threat of a strange man. You have later a village filled with so many pregnant women. They're like, how
Mm-hmm.
so many pregnant women be? Like, usually, like, if you're gonna, like, pregnancy pact, you know, like, with your friends, there's only a few. There was so many, and to the point where they were burying a child every few days because of how many pregnant women there are. And while I just made a joke about it, what the reality of it is not very funny. It's actually super sad. So basically, I read an article in Horror Obsessive called Women's Pain and the Weighing in Impetigore. And you basically get an overview of the film's portrayal that links back to societal issues in Indonesia. The article states, overall, the violence against, the rage of, and the lack of social mobility for women and children depicted in Impetigore shadows the real-life struggle for women's rights in Indonesia. The prolific and resilient feminist movement of Indonesia is both spurred and challenged by oppressive traditionalism. In Indonesia, teenage girls are leading a movement to end child marriage, and the government, which is influenced by fundamentalist religious groups, rejects feminist legislation and is complicit in systemic violence against women. So this film is saying a lot, even though I think without that context, viewers who may not be like well versed in what is happening across the world outside of America might not know. So it's saying a lot, even if it might not be obvious, which I don't know if I would have gotten, without reading the articles, I don't know if I would have gotten to exactly here. I think I would have like been able to be like, there's a lot of violence against ladies and like picked up on that, but maybe not understanding why. So there are many movements taking place in Indonesia calling for an end of child marriage and an end of systemic violence against women. The violence in child marriage is blatant, in my opinion, as it takes children and forces them to be wives and mothers. So you have children raising children, and that just continuously disenfranchises women from education and independence and kind of is used as a way to domesticate women and make them subservient to men. So in addition to child marriage, violence against women comes in many forms, including physical abuse, psychological violence, sexual violence, and the perpetrators, aside from individuals, can also be government or non-governmental institutions, cultural, religious, and educational. So there's an argument being made in Indonesia by these groups that are standing up, basically saying, like, this is a systemic issue. This isn't like one person here, one person there. Like, this is something that's being very intentionally brought out against the women of Indonesia.
It's cultural.
And, you know, I kind of, through all of my historical research in life, kind of see this trend that there is this trend throughout human cultures where systemic violence and oppression against a group is perpetuated by societal complicity with said violence and oppression out of matters like, if it's kind of like a human survival mechanism where it's like, if I stand up against this, I am putting myself in harm's way. So not to say all humans are inherently selfish and trash, but kind of. But there are people who are standing up against it. So that's what's most important. And it's the biggest thing is that they need support from people who are kind of like in that middle, benefiting from it. It's not directly impacting them, that they need to stand up too. Like, they shouldn't just go along with it because it's how it's always been. So
yeah, like those allies. It's like, it's not you, but like you, without knowing it, have power and should use it to help others.
Exactly. So in Indonesia, there are movements such as the Women's Anti-Violence Movement, or Gerak Perempuan, which I'm super sorry if I said that wrong, which is an alliance of a non-government organization and civil society groups. So it's a collection of people who do not have necessarily governmental influence, but do represent groups in society. In an article on the Jakarta Globe, violence against women in Indonesia is systemic and the government is not doing enough to unravel it. This violence and oppression is called out as a systemic issue. So some numbers for you that are like pretty intense. An annual report conducted by the National Commission for Women, it noted a 14% increases in the cases of violence against women in 2019, with a shocking total of 406,178 cases of violence against women. The article quotes Mutiara Ika, who is the coordinator of the women's group Perempuan Mahardika, Apologies. And she basically says violence against women is a systemic issue because it occurs repeatedly and in a never-ending circle. The government has been neglecting the marginalization and repression of women. This is said at an Indonesian Legal Aid Foundation headquarters, where this film has been like acclaimed for shifting folk horror away from just Scandinavian and European folk horrors, basically like Midsummer or Wicker Man, focusing on white people folk horror. That shows the horrors of things happening in broad daylight. Impetigore really shifts this away from a non-white lens and shows that violence and horror happens at all times, day and night, which in watching, I did not realize right away, but through reading an article, I noticed that it's very telling that this is something that's shown how the violence against women happens in Indonesia. So there's a director of the Indonesian Legal Aid Foundation, Asfinwati, and she claims violence against women is a very complex issue because women experience it not only in public, but also inside the home. It's systemic violence because it happens multiple times in all sectors and spaces. So you kind of see that throughout the film where the violence against the women in the film is happening everywhere. It's happening in dark. It's happening in light. It's happening nighttime,
In their
daytime.
house, outside.
Yeah, everywhere. And I think that was done specifically because it was trying to show that like women in Indonesia are experiencing this in all areas. So kind of stepping away from, it's like people who maybe don't have that context are like saying it's so great because it's stepping away from Midsummer's folk horror expectations, which is an article from Screen Rant. But it actually, I think, is doing that because it's trying to showcase like how real that is for women in Indonesia. Not necessarily just to pull away from white people culture, but like just as a representation of their culture themselves. So
Yeah, well, I wonder also, like, thinking about, like, because one of the big things about Midsommar and it being in the daylight was, like, you know, these, like, white people can commit these atrocious acts in broad daylight, and, like, that was the statement. Whereas with this, it's, like, it's not just broad daylight, it's all the time, and it's everywhere, and it's made into like just normalcy, like it's just expected. And so I feel like that's even more powerful than just being like arrogant, like I can be in front of anyone in the broad daylight and do it. It's like, oh well, this is happening all the time.
Yeah.
Like you know, this is so like expected that it doesn't, you don't even notice, it's just there.
And I didn't actually record this in my notes for the show, but I had read an article it was linked in the Horror Obsessive article about like the group of girls who are leading an end to child marriage, and their biggest battle is essentially convincing people who in their communities just always did it because that's like they never thought more of it because it's something that was always happening. And that through their activism that they were actually starting to change people's minds, where a 17-year-old was married to a quite older man, and that the village elders actually started questioning that. Like the people in their community started questioning that and being like, hey, is that okay? Because of their activism. So it really I thought that was really cool. Like essentially that they're making impact on it, but that like, you know, that it is something that happens so often that people kind of get used to it. Kind of how we had in Sorry to Bother You, that if it's like something so overwhelming that you don't know how to fix it, that you kind of just like accept it because you don't know how to end it. That there are people still fighting and trying to like get rid of that mentality and trying to like still make sure that it's not happening anymore.
Yeah, well, sometimes it just show like you just have to show that there's an alternative, like that this isn't the only way, and that it's not normal, and that other places are doing it this way. And it's like, I think it's great that they are encouraged to be vocal and are then looked at as like a resource instead of just like, you know, just looked over or dismissed for being like, hey, this is not cool or right. And it's like, it's crazy because some of those statistics were 2019, right? Like that's like, this is happening. Like this film
right
is
now.
relevant. Yeah. Like similar to like Blood Quantum and Sorry to Bother You. It's like, these are tales that are unfortunately seem to be evergreen. Like they're still happening, they're still relevant, and hopefully films like this inspire that change, as well as, you know, the organizations and the protests of those young women too.
And honestly, in my research, like there's a lot more information that exists. Obviously, this is something that's ongoing. So, I mean, the article goes on to outline injustices of the patriarchal job market, government bills aimed at domesticating women further. But like, that's not the end of the story. So I recommend looking at our show notes for our links. We post our blogs to give you like more information, but there's like a long history of violence and oppression against women in Indonesia and across the globe. So this film was saying a lot, and you should definitely do some research too.
Yeah, so you should always do your research, and kind of look into it and use this as a mouthpiece, you know, to see that there is an issue that we need to look into that is happening right now.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's really great, the For the Culture series, even just to kind of get a glimpse into these things that we wouldn't have known about otherwise.
No, yeah, totally agree.
So the film, Impetigore, let us tell you about it, because that's what we're going to dive into. Impetigore is from 2019. Like you said, it's streaming on Shudder. So definitely take a look at it. We will definitely spoil some things.
Yeah.
Because that's what happens here. I'm sorry. Content warning for some graphic things that happen in here, and for like child death. It's just
like pretty gruesome child death.
Yeah. So just, warnings for that, but definitely give it a watch. If you want to watch before listening to this next part, you're free to do that. But Impetigore from 2019 is about Maya, with her best friend Dinny, tries to survive in a city without a family. She realizes that she might inherit a property from a rich family. Maya returns to the village with Dinny and unaware of the dangers that were waiting for her. It is directed and written by Joko Anwar, and it stars Tara Basro and Ario Bayu and Marissa Anita. So, nice. Very female-centric story, like Kat was saying. To me, I feel like this film, it's not quite the generational trauma that Blood Quantum was, but I do think there is this theme of like generational or inheriting like prejudice or like expectations, because like she's coming back and people are holding her accountable for things that have nothing to do with her. Like at the end of the day, and that's kind of like how all of that is, like the abuse that like these women are dealing with is like that has nothing to do with them. It's not specifically their problem. It's just the whole culture. It's like this is what is expected. And so I think it's that I think there's this theme of inescapable curses, like compounding them, right? Like attempting to repair the past only results in more trauma and guilt and grief and pains.
Like reopening wounds, essentially.
Yeah, but also it's like it'll just take a new form. And, it's this question of, can we truly escape the trauma of our ancestors, and can we ever go home again? Is it something that we should just separate ourselves from? Because ultimately, like, she goes back there and she's in danger. Like, you in danger, girl. Run. But what struck me was the beginning of this film, which really sets the tone for being a woman and being afraid. Yeah. Because we have Maya and Dinny, who are both toll booth workers. They work in different toll booths, so they just communicate over the phone, kind of like what Kat and I are doing virtually, right? Like having this connection, but still being far. And so Maya is there, working in the darkness. And she like brings up that there's been a creepy stranger who would drive by and just stare at her. And that he comes several times a day. Like that, it just seems like, unnatural or like that's not what usually happens. Like who comes through a toll booth so often, and in hers, like almost like he
like make sure schedule. To go to hers.
And so like that is in any like woman who, like, especially existing in America, I'm sure have had that experience where there's someone who you don't want to overreact, right? Like you don't want it to seem like you're being paranoid or, suspicious, where it's just like, but that person is walking like in the same direction as me for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
Or why did they come into this store at the same time that I did after like trailing me for this whole time? Like I've had that. Like I've had things where I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, I'm going to take a different route home, like take the longer route so they don't know where I live or something like that.
Yeah.
And so it's right away I was like, I'm afraid, like with
Mm-hmm.
her. Like I understand that fear, like in that paranoia. And it kicks it off with the fact that he shows up and he stares at her. And I think when he pulls over in the background, I remember you and I were texting while we were watching it, and we were both freaking out. Like we were panicking with her. And as she's like
Yeah.
frantically like trying to slam the door, she's calling like her friend, she's trying to call the people. It's like, do I wait in this tiny little isolated box to save myself? Do I run? Like, what do I do? Like, it's just me against
Mm-hmm.
this man I don't know. For no reason, he wants to attack me.
Mm-hmm.
And like at the end, it's usually how it is, right? Like you
Yeah.
don't have any good reason why they are attacking you, and they ultimately just are. And it really is the heart of this film, which is the struggles of these women.
Mm-hmm.
From Maya and Dinny, their struggles kind of through their normal life and kind of setting the tone of she doesn't belong and she's a loner, she just has this friend, to being in the village and then meeting every woman in there, like every
Mm-hmm.
single woman I felt for. Like even the
Yeah.
so-called villain, which we'll talk about too, I was like, she ain't wrong. She ain't wrong either. Like at the end of the day, they all are kind of justified, and I think that's really authentic and interesting for a film.
Mm-hmm.
That like each one of these is made victim to the misogynistic and patriarchal society that treats their bodies as vessels.
Yeah.
And that's like it. Right? So Maya, our protagonist, is an orphan and an outcast, and she learns that she's inherited potentially this home, and so she has to return to this like lost in time village that is very difficult to get to.
Mm-hmm.
It is moody, dark, depressing, and I really love the nature of this building. There's like this transition from like the city, right? We're on the bus, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
a way of transportation. Then we're on like this like carriage, right? And then we're like going in there, and then we're on foot when we're in the village. So it's like this, like we're slowly like losing the technology and the like normal society, and we're like
Mm-hmm.
traveling back in time into this village. And the village is like you remarked on it a few times, Kat, was like how beautiful the nature was. Like the trees are like wrapped in vines, and they're
Mm-hmm.
always kind of framing the shots. Like the scene is always happening between these trees, and like there's the beautiful cemetery that's super sad. Like her house that she inherits is like awesome because it's huge, and she's like, I've
Yeah.
never seen a house this big, which is already like a red flag, because it's like, why is no one living in this giant house? Everyone's living in their small houses. And then it's like wrapped in vines. It kind of
Mm-hmm.
reminded me of Crimson Peak, how it was
Mm.
like that beautiful mansion, and then there was like everything was falling apart. And
Mm-hmm.
like the fact that she has that the bed, and or not the bed, the tub, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like such a great tub, but then there's the vines on the wall, and like they still have to like pump the water. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so it's
There's a
like
lot of water to have to pump.
yeah, and it's like this dichotomy, right, of like wealth but also just like the nature of it, like it's returned to nature and it's been abandoned, and it is the symbol of wealth and also the symbol of pain, which is
Mm-hmm.
like those are one and the same, I feel like.
Yeah.
So I think it's shot beautifully throughout the whole thing. I think it's always kind of desaturated,
Mm-hmm.
like you can, like it changes the time of day, but it is always kind of the same tone throughout the whole
Mm.
time. So you don't really even notice. It's just like every day is the same. Every night is the same. It's
Yeah.
desaturated. It's kind of claustrophobic because of the vines and the nature and the way that the town, like the village, is kind of close together. And it's like grungy. almost. Like
Yeah.
you just feel kind of dirty when you're watching it. Or not dirty, but just like you've been trekking through with them,
You're
which is
also in
interesting.
the nature.
Yeah. And it's like also like when they were, you know, when they were in the beginning, when they're in like the city part and they're in like the marketplace, like it's like sweaty and like full of people. And then we get to this like village and there's like no one. Like you don't see anybody. And I thought that was like really weird. Um, in the blog that you could read on our website, I wrote, "A good man is hard to find," because it's one of my favorite short stories. But it is impossible in this film to find a good man. There are none. There are zero. And I think it's because of it is representative of the patriarchal society that's super toxic, and it destroys itself, right? Like because there are people who are trying to fight against it, and then it just like keeps building and compounding on itself. In the village, and it ends up twisting it and destroying it from the inside. But every single man in this film is toxic. Both of Maya's supposed fathers, so she has like the one that she thinks is her father, who's a rich guy. He's evil. Like he didn't commit the murders that they said he did, but he did kill 3 children. Her actual father, who she finds out is her father later, did commit those crimes that they put on the other dad.
So it's not like the children, but the other ones.
But he killed other children instead.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is super ableist. But also, like, I understand. Like, this is a small, remote village. It's not like they got health care. But still, super toxic. The village men are awful. One, in that, like, they allow their children to be murdered. They're alive. Those kids are alive. They're not in the best shape. And maybe that could be a cause of like the fact that this is a small village, that no one leaves, no one comes in. So maybe there's some incest happening even by accident. But like that could be an explanation for what this curse is. But at the end of the day, they're letting their kids be killed. But also we see there's another woman, Rati, who is very pregnant or a little pregnant. And she helps Maya. And there's a scene where these men come in, and because her husband isn't here, they like try to rape her. They try to attack her. And because her husband isn't home. Like they respect him, not her. You're open for us to have. Like we're in the middle of looking for a woman so we can murder her to save our children. But on the way, we're going to hurt you. Like, that's how twisted they are. Like, it's just absolutely toxic. And even, like, Rati's husband. So, like, Rati loves him. But it's, like, this is a guy who she, like, grew up with. And she's got to be with this guy. She's got to be the wife. And she loves him. But even he shows his true colors because he was the one who attacked her in the beginning. Maya. So, it's, like, no one is good. There's not a single good one. And I think, like, that really kind of shows how deep it goes, like that you can't find a single good one. Even thinking of like Ni, the older woman who essentially starts the curse spiral. She started it because her son was cheating, like being a cheater. He was being adulterous with another man's wife. But that son that she has is the result of being raped by a man who was the previous puppet master. So it's like it just keeps going. Like her son let her down, and then also like his existence isn't what she wanted anyway. Like, or like wasn't planned and didn't come from a good event, right? So it's like not giving her excuses because like.
Which she was super evil, but yes, trauma, super evil, hurt people. So
exactly, yeah, she's definitely guilty, but I can understand what led her to that, right? And I think with her character is that she really wanted to undo this curse. I don't know if she fully understood that it was her fault. I don't think she really was like the puppet master, the ultimate puppet master that was pulling the strings and causing all of those deaths. I think it just kind of happens, like it spiraled out and then it was like out of her control. And she so badly wants to fix that. She wants to redeem herself. And I think every time a baby is born without skin, she feels it. And that's
Yeah.
why she has grown desperate and wild and is like trying to kill and stop this by whatever means necessary, because the grief just has corrupted her. And it's, in a way, I feel like that might even be an element of the curse itself, was like a way to like get into, like, curled up into her and cause her to do this as well. Yeah. So there's an article on Horror Obsessive, which you talked about a few times, Kat, called Women's Pain and Wying and Impetigore. And I also read it. It's by Rebecca Saunders. And because it's very good. It is, really calling out this film and explaining some of those injustices and what it's really saying, the major themes of it. And one of the quotes that I pulled from it was, "Overall, the horror of Impetigore is rooted in the victimization of women and children. In fact, depictions of violence against children in this film, while not fetishized or overdone, are almost intolerable. There is not a single sympathetic male character to be found in the city or in the village, and even male characters who are marginally sympathetic are eventually traitorous. Dinny's cruel fate is the earliest example of brutal female victimization in the film. The mystery of the frightful ghost children once revealed exemplifies the treacherous exploitation of children, and the multitude of pregnant women whose babies are not allowed to live intensifies the focus on this type of victimization." What I found the most interesting in this film was the justification for the horror. It's not often that you have a cult horror film or a folk horror film, like thinking of like Midsommar, right? Like I do not feel for the people in that village at all. I was never like, it makes sense to me. Why not?
Yeah, they weren't like going through anything. They were just like living their life and chose to make these decisions.
Exactly.
Where like here, they're going through horrific things.
Yeah, like these are people who are plagued with years of pain from this plague that has infected their children. It's like, imagine being a woman in this place and there's no contraceptives. You have to get married because that's your only role in society. As soon as you get married, you're going to be pregnant. And that whole time, you can't ever allow yourself to be hopeful. You can't ever allow yourself to love what's in there because it's going to come out broken and that you don't get it in the end. And it's just like repeating that same grief over and over and over again. Like that is a specific type of evil and trauma that like you cannot just like get up from. Like you don't like, if the curse, suppose the curse is lifted even, like I feel like if you had lost 1, 2, 3 children to the curse in the beginning, it's like you would be so afraid to find joy and to allow yourself to believe that this one was going to be okay. And so like that itself is a punishment. It is a pain. It is a restriction that like they can't even find joy in the one thing, right? So like for 9 months, you are just fully aware of the futility of the situation and that it is doomed, whether you like it or not. And I think that's really heartbreaking because, and it's also like the husbands too, right? Like, they're not redeeming, but that's kind of like they've been stripped away from like the fact that they're supposed to be a father. Like they let their children down because this curse exists, like because their kids can't even exist. They can't let their name go on. Like so many of those things that are so like patriarchal and misogynistic are being canceled out too. And so like it kind of corrupts them and they're all twisted. And so, there's just this immense grief in these villagers. And so when they are like turning into a mob and coming after Maya, I honestly was just like, I get it. I really can't blame them because like
they just want their babies to be okay. Like ultimately, like they just want to be able to, as you said, like the patriarchal end, wanting their names to go on. And the only way that can happen is to sacrifice one person. So they're like, we've been having to sacrifice all these children. Of course, we're going to sacrifice her. Yeah,
it's like, what's one woman I don't know who has a history of evil that we know? Like her dad was evil. That's all we know. And that's like the one person that we believe in told us to do it. Like, what else do we have? Like, that's our only bit of hope. Yeah, I think like even in the very end, so like the kind of closing scene, we see that when you let your guard down and
Mm-hmm.
let even the minimal amount of joy, like we see this joyous couple, it only creates even more pain because it, like her scream was because they thought they got out and she had the audacity to dream of a future where she had a kid that was normal and
Yeah.
that she could have it, right? Like that she could just get to live this future
Yeah,
that
they
she was
like they were
promised.
actually hopeful, which makes the devastation even worse. Where it's like it's not worse, I guess, but like it hits harder in that like when you
Yeah.
go into something with expectations and those expectations are like devastated, like you become devastated where like if you know it still is awful, but you've like guarded yourself a little bit to it.
Yeah. Like, because we see it, there's two women who are told, like, the first woman where you think because, you know, they think the curse is lifted, she thinks that her baby's going to be fine and then he isn't. And
Yeah.
she's like destroyed. And then we see a second one who doesn't believe it because they don't know that, like, they're worried about the curse. They don't think it's lifted. And then it turns out that the kid is okay.
Yeah.
And so there's like this weird, like, oh, I get a kid now. Like
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that. I was setting myself up for sadness. And I think that really is the heart of the curse is that you can't escape, right? Like the fact that it gets compounded and all of that, but the real horror is that you can't even allow yourself to hope
Yeah.
and dream of escape. And that really is what tears people down, and destroys what little like joy or happiness that they had in there. Um, There's another article I found on the spool called Impetigore Drags You Through the Curse of Country Life, by Clint Worthington. And it says, Onwar's latest is a tragic supernatural drama about people caught on the raw end of a deal someone else made for them. The villagers are frightening and in the thrall of murderous forces. When Maya asked one sympathetic villager why they follow Biyu's character, her response is, who else do we have to look up to here? But they're driven by desperation to lift a curse that has claimed their children for years. Obviously, we root for our heroine to lift the curse without having to lose her life, but the savagery of the townsfolk is born of genuine, decades-long pain they're willing to stamp out by any means necessary. And in
Yeah.
the end, they are led, to destruction by the people in power and the people that they trust, the
Mm-hmm.
people that they thought were looking out for them.
Yeah, where they thought were like the ones ending the curse, not the cause of it.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things is, so Rati is a woman who has a ridiculous amount of hope for such a bleak place. Like she just, like, no matter what is thrown at her, she kind of is she's like, okay. Like she's
Mm-hmm.
getting through it. She's like, yeah, well, gotta keep going.
Yeah.
And she, explains that her mother is a spiritual woman who told her that you can't remove a curse. Like you can't get rid of a curse. If you do that,
Mm.
it'll be replaced with a worse one. And
Ooh.
that's kind of like what we see, because we see like the first curse was just on this one woman, and then it spiraled at like, which is what Maya like was cursed not to have skin, which then resulted in like her dad doing demonic stuff and killing
Yeah.
children, which then like resulted in this guy killing like villagers, which resulted in the village not having any children with skin.
Yeah.
And I think like it's hopeless again and like tangled up, because it's just like the only answer at the end is to leave. But Maya tries to fight and stop the curse, which she learns is not her father's, but her grandmother's curse. And it just, I feel like it was pointless, because you can't break away from this curse. It
Yeah.
just evolves and never lets you go, which is really bleak,
Yeah.
and sad to envision. But I think it really did speak on the issues that these people have been facing, is
Mm-hmm.
that there's just no one there to help. And I don't want to say like you're all on your own, but you are all on your own.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like, can you ever go home?
Yeah.
No.
That was a super sad film. Worth it, but so sad.
Yeah. like in the horror of it was very unique. Like there's no, like you said, like jump scares. There's like spooky things, like where there's a lot of darkness and you're always looking in the darkness for whatever it is. And there are times when there are things out there. There are ghosts, like there's the 3 ghost girls. But it's really what is terrifying is the situations that are happening. It's like seeing the children or seeing the one child that got to live and they just abandoned him in the woods. Or like seeing that guy at the beginning, like I was like, this is terrible. This is the most horrifying film for right now. But like, yeah, I think they were all very authentic, natural scares that were just good.
Yeah. No, it was really well done. It was also like I watched his film festival thing. That he like was talking about how it was made and whatever. And he actually like went to villages that like were in the middle of nowhere to film and like stuff like that. So I thought that was really cool too. That like he was very authentic in even location to what he was trying to portray.
Yeah. Yeah, he's very intentional. There's another film by him that I'm sure we'll cover later as well, that people rave about as well, because he just has a very natural way of, using the environment and using just human emotion to drive the story and not rely on like jump scares or, monsters, right? Like, because the monsters are the people. And it really it really got to my heart. Like it was heavy in a different way than like Blood Quantum was. Right? Like Blood Quantum was a lot to take and like I felt sick, like in a way that like was good. Like I appreciated it. And I think it was really inventive. But this one was like, it just sat with me for a while where it's just like, could you imagine like, I can't even be mad, I can't even be mad. And I think that speaks volumes of what happens when you're authentic and you're intentional in telling your story and seeing like how it ties back to the reality of the situation too. It's like phenomenal.
Yeah.
I guess for ratings,
I guess if you like it, like hope that things will get better. And if you don't like it, it's just big sads.
Big sad. Yeah. So if you like it, it's hoping against hope, despite the circumstances. Allowing yourself to hope, even though that means that it might hurt more.
Yeah.
But like at least you got to hope for a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? Like I feel like that's better than being like sad forever.
Yeah. Get a little blip of happiness.
Yeah. And if you don't like it, it's big sad.
Big sad.
Hopeless, big sad. So Kat, for what's happening in Indonesia.
Well, it's big sad. It's definitely big sad. But hope in the fact that there are like organizations and movements that are trying to make it better.
Yeah, I agree. I think the hope against hope is those young women who are fighting and are making a difference. Like the fact that they can see that there is a difference and that people are like, hey,
let's question this now.
Yeah, like that's progress. Just asking the right questions, just looking into it is progress. And so I think, and then with, the situation and the fact that, it's still going on, I think we can relate that happens quite a lot of places in the world, which is big sad. And so it's only hoping that organizations like that can pop up everywhere and we can have a future where it's not like that. And then for the film, for me, is definitely a hope against hope because it is really good. It's genuinely really, really well done. Great story. I don't even remember how long it is because I was just like, just watched it.
It was pretty long, but like not like crazy long. Like it was definitely every minute counted. Like nothing was extra. Everything was very intentional and like needed to be there.
Yeah. I think like some of the parts where she's in the marketplace in the city kind of thing, there was some like spooky stuff that was happening there.
Yeah.
But I would have liked to like just hop on the bus and get right to the village. That was creepy. But I get like setting the tone of who she was.
Yeah.
It definitely was necessary.
Yeah, and you get to see a little bit more of Indonesia too, which is cool.
Yeah. I really enjoyed that. That was one thing I liked, was seeing that, and because that's not a place I ever get to see, like,
Yeah,
like
fair.
on screen.
Yeah.
And so it's nice. I am thankful for that, because I was like, oh, that's what that place looks like. Cool. Like, I started looking, I was like, where is this? I was like, I don't know
Yeah.
where this is.
I looked like immediately because the puppetry is like Javanese is the language that they use, and Java is like a place in Indonesia that has, I believe, Islamic roots. And I thought that was just like really interesting because I did not know that before. So it was cool to like get a little glimpse into everything, especially if they went to a real like isolated village. That's something you don't get to see every day.
Yeah. And because like there was like, when you say like it's ancestry there, because there's a part where like Dinny and Maya are in the cemetery and they find her parents, and she's like, well, I should say a prayer, I don't know any prayers. And she's like, do you think God only knows Arabic? Like, she like makes a joke of that, like,
Yeah.
you could speak English to it, or like not English, what they were speaking.
Yeah.
And I thought that was like I thought it was funny, but it was also like, oh, I didn't know.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know that that's what they like. It was just like the whole way through. It was like I was learning and being educated about, this place, and also like the horrors that were in it. So
Yeah.
definitely a great
10 out
film.
of 10,
Great film.
man.
Absolutely. So that's Impetigore, our third in the For the Culture series. It's going to be a long one, so sit tight,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of films and we're really excited about them. And so I hope you're enjoying this series. Remember to like and subscribe, drop us a comment. We always appreciate that. Share us on social media, and follow the blog too, so you can see what other things we found, or if you just like reading.
Educate yourself. Get SMRT.
Yes.
Smart.
All right. Well, with that being said,
Don't get married.
don't get married. Delete your kids.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah, that's rough. They don't
Okay.
eat your kids. They just drown them.
Oh, no.
different.
The last curse was Eden. So.
Oh, right. Yeah, you're right. She did.
Yeah.
Ooh. Why did that keep
what
happening?
a sight. I don't know. Because uncomfortable. Probably uncomfortable.
Leave the babies alone.
Yeah.
Okay, bye.
Bye.